Hey guys, this is Mr. Teen Tutor here, and today we are going to be talking about radical equations. Here's a sample problem. If the square root of 2x plus 3 minus the square root of x plus 1 equals 1, what is the value of x? When you approach any radical problem, what you should think about doing is isolating the radical. Now, if there are multiple radicals on one side of the equation, then choose one that you would like to isolate. So I would rather isolate the 2x plus 3 rather than this radical, because even though when I bring this to this side and I'm going to square both sides, cancel the radical, this is a minus sign. So that can kind of change things up a bit and make things a bit complicated. So I would rather keep the isolated radical positive. So I'm going to move radical x plus 1 to this side. So if it's a minus right here, I'm going to add it to this side. So I get 2x plus 3 equaling, and I would put the square root value first. X plus 1 plus 1. Now, like I said, in order to get rid of that radical, we need to square both sides. And when there's more than one term on one side of the equation involving a radical, don't just put the squared sign, just write it all out. Because if you write it all out, then you won't necessarily make a mistake. So when I square this, the radical goes away. So I'm left with 2x plus 3 here. Now here, we need to do FOIL, which is first, outer, inner, last. So I'm going to multiply these terms together, which is x plus 1. And then I'm going to take this term times that term. That's going to be plus positive rad x plus 1. And I'm going to multiply these two. That's going to be rad x plus 1. So if I add two rad x plus 1s together, it's going to be 2 times x plus 1. And then 1 times 1. So this is what we have. Now again, you want to isolate the radicals. So we need to bring these pieces of information and these pieces of information to this side of the equation. So before we do that, let's at least simplify that side of the equation. So I have x plus 2 plus 2 root x plus 1. Now that I have that, let's bring the x here. So I'm going to subtract x from both sides. Put it underneath the right term so that you know the operation you're performing and what you're doing. And then you're going to subtract 2. But for this 2 right here, leave it, because this 2 is bounded by multiplication to this radical. So don't subtract 2 from here, subtract 2 from here. So when I do that, I get x plus 1 equaling 2 root x plus 1. Now you have a choice. You could divide both sides by 2 and have x plus 1 over 2 equaling the square root of x plus 1. But if you think about it, we're going to have to square both sides again. And squaring a fraction here, it'll work out obviously, but then it'll become too complicated. It may not seem that way to you, but to stay on the easy side, let's not divide by 2. Unless, if these two terms were divisible by 2, then dividing by 2 would be the right thing. But because that's not the case, we're going to square both sides of the equation. Let's x plus 1. And again, even though you may know how to square both sides, write it all out, because this is an easy place where you can make some errors. So again, I'm going to do FOIL. So I get x squared plus 2x plus 1. And that's equal to, I put 2 times 2, multiply like terms, 4, times, multiply these two, that's x plus 1. So this is in parentheses. I come down here and I get x squared plus 2x plus 1 equaling 4x plus 4. Now, we're going to have to either factor or use the quadratic equation to solve for x. So we need to get this equal to 0. So we need to bring this side and bring these terms and bring it to this side of the equation. So we're going to subtract 4x and we're going to subtract 4. So if we come over here, we have x squared minus 2x minus 3 equals 0. The first thing you should do now is, before you even think about using the quadratic formula, let's see if this factors. So for those of you who don't know how to factor this, you take the product of A and C, and then you say to yourself, what are the factors of -3 when added together? Added equal -2. Well, that'd be -3 and 1, because -3 and 1 are factors of -3, and when you add those two together, you get -2. Now, because there's an x squared there, we don't have to worry about factor by grouping it all. So what we can just say is x plus 3, oh, I'm sorry, not x plus 3. You just follow what that says. X minus 3 and x plus 1, because this is negative, -3, and positive 1, and that's equal to 0. Then we use what's called, if we bring this over here, then we use what's called zero product property, where we set this equal to 0, x minus 3, and we set x plus 1 equal to 0. Why we do that? Because one of these expressions is 0. It's possible that both of these are not 0, but one of them is. So in order to find their x value, you set both of them equal to 0 individually. So if we do ZPP, x minus 3 equaling 0, we get x equals 3, and we get x equals -1. Now stop right here for a second. You may think that these are the answers, and you may think that because you got these answers. However, this is an important term that you need to remember. When you're working with radical equations, if there's any point in the problem, any one point, even if it's just once, twice, doesn't matter. If you raise a radical to an even power, you must check your solutions, because there may be a case where the solutions may not work. Now, of course, when you attempt any radical problem and find some answers, you should of course check your work. But it's especially important to check your work, rather check your solutions, if you raise radicals to an even power. So we got x equals 3 and x equals -1. And for a solution that actually doesn't work, we call that extraneous. Now in this problem, like I said, there may not be an extraneous solution, but there may be, so let's check it out. Remember, the radical, anything under the radical, has to be greater than or equal to 0. So you have to keep that in mind. So if we sub in 3, 2 times 3 is, and ignore, let's go back here actually. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 plus 3 is 9. What's the square root of 9? 3. I sub in 3 plus 1 here, 4. That's 2. 3 minus 2 equals 1. And you should, just so you don't forget, you should show that it works. Now let's check -1. Now this is negative, so we have to be aware of the fact that it's possible that one of these radicals is less than 0. And if that's the case, it's automatically an extraneous solution. However, that may not be the case. Let's see. If I plug in -1 right here, this is -2 plus 3, which is +1. So we're all right, no negative number. And if I sub in -1 here, that's 0. Square root of 0 is 0. And 1 minus 0 is 1. So in this problem, x equals 3 or x equals -1. There you go. That is your answer. X can equal 3 or -1. So I hope this video has helped you guys with radical equations. As for some tips, make sure that you show all your work completely, write it all out so that you make sure that you don't make any careless mistakes, and always be on the lookout for numbers that may not make sense. Always check your solutions. Don't always assume that they'll all work, because there may be some cases where you're wrong. If you do all those steps and perform them correctly, I guarantee you guys will do well on this particular concept.